The lock clicked differently that night. I don't know how else to explain it. I'd heard that lock my whole life. Every time I came home from school, every time I snuck in past curfew at 17, every time I came back from college for the holidays. It always made the same sound. But standing in the hallway of my mother's house at 28 years old, suitcase at my feet, listening to my stepfather turn the deadbolt from the inside, it sounded like something closing that was never meant to open again. My name is not important. What happened inside that house is, my dad passed when I was 19, pancreatic cancer. Fast and mean, the way that kind always is. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the last breath, and then it was just me and my mom in that house on Mercer Lane, figuring out how to be a family of two. We did okay. She went back to work at the dental office. I finished school, got a job doing billing for a physical therapy clinic, moved into a studio apartment 20 minutes away. We had Sunday dinners. We called each other too much. We were fine. Then she met him. His name was Roland. She introduced him at Thanksgiving, about 3 years after my dad died. He was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a door frame and knows it. He brought a good bottle of wine and laughed at all the right moments and helped clear the table without being asked. My mom looked at him the way I hadn't seen her look at anyone since my dad, and I thought, okay, she deserves this. That was my first mistake. The second was not paying attention to the small things soon enough. It started with what I can only call a quiet reshuffling. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to and say, there, that's where it went wrong. Roland moved in about 8 months after they started dating. My mom's house, my dad's house, really the one he'd spent 20 years paying off, became Roland's project. He repainted the living room without asking. He replaced my dad's armchair, the brown leather one with the cracked armrest, with a sleek gray sectional that looked like it belonged in a magazine and felt like sitting on a firm handshake. He said he wanted to make things feel fresh for her. My mom said it was sweet. I noticed he always said, my house, when talking to his friends on the phone. Not our house, his. I noticed he started answering questions my mom directed at me. She'd ask what I thought about something, a decision about the dental office, a trip she was considering, and before I could open my mouth, Roland would be talking. I noticed he didn't like it when she and I spent time alone together. Not overtly. He never said, don't see your daughter. He was smoother than that. He'd make plans for them on the Sundays we usually had dinner. He'd call her 3 times during the afternoon I was visiting, little check-ins, always with a reason. He'd be noticeably cold when I was there. Not rude, just distant in that particular way that makes the air in a room feel thinner. And my mom, who wanted everyone to be comfortable, would cut visits short. I'd drive home feeling like I'd done something wrong without knowing what. Then came the finances. My mom had always been careful with money. Savings account, modest spending, no debt except the last few years on the mortgage, which my dad's life insurance had wiped out. She was secure. Not wealthy, but solid. Roland's pitch, and it was a pitch, I understand that now, was that he could help her do better. He had some background in real estate, some history with investments. He wanted to consolidate things, simplify, make her money work harder. She let him. Joint accounts first. Then gradually, her individual accounts started going quiet. She'd mention offhand that Roland was handling something, that he'd moved some funds around, that he was taking care of it. I asked once, carefully, if she was keeping her own access. She laughed and said I sounded paranoid. I backed off. I shouldn't have. The first time I knew something was truly wrong was a Tuesday afternoon in March. I'd stopped by to drop off a birthday card for my aunt, my mom's sister, who was coming to visit the following weekend. Roland's car was in the driveway, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. I knocked. He answered the door in a way that made it clear he did not want me inside. He said my mom was resting. He stood in the doorway. I said I'd just leave the card and go. He said he'd give it to her. I said I'd prefer to leave it myself, in the kitchen, where she'd see it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. My mom was in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, still in her bathrobe, at 2 in the afternoon. And when she looked up at me, something moved across her face. Relief, I think, or something close to it. before she smoothed it back into a smile. She said she was just tired. She said everything was fine. She held my hand across the table and asked about work. On my way out, Roland was in the hallway. He didn't say anything. He just watched me go. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could drive. I started paying closer attention after that. I'd been keeping a loose mental file of things that didn't add up, and now I started writing them down. The way she sounded on the phone, shorter, careful, like she was aware of being heard. The fact that she'd stopped mentioning things about her own life, her own opinions, and mostly just talked about what Roland was doing, thinking, planning. The aunt's visit that somehow got moved, then canceled. The Sunday dinners that had become once a month, then less. In June, she mentioned her car was having trouble. I offered to help her take it in. She said Roland was going to handle it. 2 weeks later, she mentioned it again, still having trouble. I asked if Roland had taken it in. She said he'd been busy. In August, she told me she wasn't going back to the dental office. She said Roland thought it made more sense for her to be home, to have time for herself. She said it like she believed it, but she'd loved that job for 11 years. I called my aunt, the one whose visit had been canceled twice now, and she'd noticed the same things. We talked for an hour. We both agreed something was wrong. Neither of us knew yet exactly what to do. The vitamins were the thing that finally made me understand what I was dealing with. I'd come by on a Saturday, one of the rare visits that stuck. My mom mentioned she'd been feeling foggy lately, tired, having headaches. She said Roland had suggested some supplements, vitamins, things to help with energy and clarity. She showed me the bottles. There were 5 of them. I looked at the labels. I don't have a medical background, but I have Google and I have a functioning sense of alarm. Some of those combinations, the dosages, the interactions, they were not right. Nothing dramatic enough to be immediately obvious. Just enough, taken consistently, to make someone feel off, slow, dependent. I took photos of the bottles before I left. I sent them to a nurse I'd gone to college with, a woman named Petra, not that Petra, a different one, and asked her what she thought. She called me that same night. She said she wasn't in a position to diagnose anything, but that she was concerned and that I should get my mom seen by her own doctor without Roland present as soon as possible. I started making plans. It took 3 weeks to arrange. I had to do it carefully. I told my mom I wanted to take her out for lunch, just the 2 of us, and I'd made a salon appointment for her as a treat. She was pleased. Roland, when I called to coordinate, something that felt wrong even as I did it, coordinating access to my own mother, said he'd be out that afternoon. We had lunch, we went to the salon. In between, I drove her past her doctor's office and said I'd pre-scheduled a quick checkup as part of the treat, that she'd mentioned feeling off and I just wanted to make sure she was okay. She laughed at me, called me a worrier. She went in. I waited in the car with my hands in my lap and didn't move for 40 minutes. When she came out, she was quieter than before. Her doctor had asked her some questions, had reviewed her recent blood work, had expressed some concerns, had asked her to come back for a follow-up. She didn't say much on the drive home. I didn't push. That night, she called me and cried. It was the first time she'd cried in front of me, or at me, in years. She said she didn't know when she'd stop trusting herself. She said she couldn't explain why she'd let so many things slide. She said she felt like she'd been walking through fog for so long she'd forgotten what clear air felt like. I said, I know. I said, we're going to figure this out. I said, don't tell him we talked. She didn't. Here's where it gets worse before it gets better. 2 days after that phone call, Roland went through her phone. I don't know if he saw the call log or if he found something else, or if he'd just been watching closely enough to notice a change in her. But he knew something had shifted, and the following Saturday, when I showed up for the visit we'd planned, I had barely gotten through the door before he started. He didn't yell at first. He was controlled, the way he always was, but there was an edge in his voice I hadn't heard before. He said I was interfering. He said I was filling my mother's head with anxiety and suspicion. He said I had no business coming around and disrupting what they had built. I told him I was there to see my mother. He stepped between me and the hallway. I told him to move. What happened next happened fast. He grabbed my arm, not gently, not incidentally, but gripped and yanked, and told me to get out of his house. I pulled back. He shoved me. I hit the edge of the door frame. My mom came out of the kitchen. She saw. She said his name, once, the way you say someone's name when you're trying to hold reality in place. He let go of my arm. He straightened his shirt. He said I had provoked him. He said I should leave before things got worse. I didn't leave. I called the police from the front step while he stood in the doorway watching me. My hand was shaking so much I had to dial twice. I told the dispatcher my stepfather had physically assaulted me. I gave the address. I stood on that front step and I did not move until the patrol car pulled up. 2 officers. They took my statement. They photographed the marks on my arm. 5 distinct finger bruises already starting to darken along the inside of my forearm. They went inside and spoke to Roland. They spoke to my mom. I could see her through the front window, sitting at the kitchen table. And I watched the expression on her face while she answered their questions. And that was the moment. Not the shove, not the bruises, not the months of slowly accumulating evidence. That was the moment I understood how far gone things had been. She looked terrified, not of the officers, of him. Roland was arrested that afternoon. Misdemeanor assault, the officers said, though given the circumstances and his prior, which I didn't know about yet but which came out during processing, it would likely be elevated. They walked him out the front door past the patchy flower bed my dad had planted, and my mom stood on the porch and watched, and she did not cry. The weeks after that were not simple. I want to be honest about that, because the story doesn't just tidy up once the bad person is removed from the house. My mom stayed with me for the first week. She slept a lot. She was quiet. She went back to her doctor and started untangling the supplement situation. It took about 6 weeks for the fog to fully lift, and she said afterward that she hadn't realized how much of herself she'd lost until it started coming back. She described it like recovering from an illness she hadn't known she had. Roland had a previous restraining order, a woman in another state from several years earlier. It hadn't come up because no one had thought to look. My mom's lawyer filed a protective order immediately, and it was granted within 48 hours. The financial situation took longer. He'd moved significant money. Not all of it was recoverable. Some of it probably isn't. We're still working through it. He was charged with assault and with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a charge that carries real weight in our state. His hearing is scheduled. I am going to be there. My aunt flew in for a week in September. The 3 of us sat at my mom's kitchen table, the same table where I'd held her hand all those months ago and felt something was wrong without being able to name it. And we drank coffee and we talked about my dad, and my mom laughed at something real for the first time in what felt like years. She went back to the dental office in October. They'd kept her position. Her boss said she'd been missed. The house feels different now. The gray sectional is gone. She didn't make a big deal of it, didn't announce she was reclaiming anything. She just had it hauled off one Thursday morning and put a small blue lead seat where it used to be. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that required an explanation. I still drive over on Sundays. She still calls too much. I don't tell this story because I handled everything right. I didn't. I waited too long at several points. I softened too many concerns because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable, because I was aware that she was an adult who got to make her own choices, because I was afraid of being the daughter who couldn't let her mother move on. I spent a long time wondering if I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. If there is one thing I would have done differently, it is this. The moment I sat in my car outside her house, unable to drive, I should have stopped asking myself if I was overreacting and started writing things down. Not to build a case, not to confront anyone, just to have a record, just so I could look at it and know I wasn't losing my mind. The photos I took of those supplement bottles were the most important thing I did. My college friend, the nurse, told me later that what she saw in those labels wasn't necessarily something a doctor would flag from the outside, but it was enough to know that someone with knowledge was making deliberate choices. That word, deliberate, it changed how I understood everything that had come before. I think about the version of the story that goes differently, where I stay quiet 1 more time, or 2 more times, or 5, where my mom never quite comes out of the fog, where Roland finishes whatever it was he was doing and moves on, and she's left alone and diminished in a house that no longer feels like hers, with accounts that are empty and an identity that's been quietly dismantled over 3 years. That version exists. It happens to people. It happened to someone I didn't know until this was all over. A woman who'd seen one of my posts about what we'd been through and messaged me to say it was exactly her story, except she'd waited until there was nothing left to save. I wrote back and said, "I'm sorry." I said, "It's not your fault." I said, "There's still something to build from." The lock on my mom's house sounds normal again. She had it replaced. New deadbolt, new keys. She gave me a copy. I have it on my keychain, right next to my own. Some nights, I still reach for it in the dark, just to make sure it's there. I used to think being a good daughter meant not making things uncomfortable. That sounds almost reasonable until you say it out loud, until you trace every moment you stayed quiet. Every time you softened a concern, talked yourself out of a gut feeling, decided it wasn't your place, and you see the shape of what that silence cost. Roland didn't take 3 years to dismantle my mother's life because he was especially clever. He took 3 years because everyone around her kept deciding not to make it a bigger deal than it probably was. That included me, and I have to live with that, even though things turned out okay, because they almost didn't. What I know now is that the instinct to not cause a scene is not kindness. Sometimes it is the most expensive thing you can offer someone you love. When I think about what finally changed the outcome of this story, it wasn't one dramatic moment. It was smaller than that. It was the decision to write things down when I noticed them. It was the discipline to keep a record even when part of me hoped I was wrong and would never need it. It was the choice to ask someone with actual knowledge, the nurse I texted about those supplement bottles, instead of just worrying alone in private. That's the part I want people to hear. Not the police car in the driveway, not the arrest, not the protective order. The photos I took before any of that. The Tuesday I sat in my car outside my mom's house, unable to drive, and decided that feeling meant something worth acting on. There's a version of integrity that looks like staying out of other people's business. I used to believe in that version. Now I think real integrity is staying present even when presence is inconvenient. Even when the person you love tells you everything is fine. Even when you're afraid of being the difficult one. My mom couldn't see clearly, not because she was weak, but because she'd been made foggy by someone who understood that a confused person is an easier person to control. She needed someone on the outside to hold the shape of things while she couldn't. That was my job, and for a long time I wasn't doing it. The courage I wish I'd had sooner wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confronting Roland in the doorway or calling a lawyer or any of the things that came later. It was just the courage to trust what I was seeing, to not negotiate myself out of my own observations, to say, I don't care if I'm wrong, I am going to find out. That kind of quiet persistence, showing up again and again with the same calm attention, refusing to be dismissed, that's what actually moved things. Not anger, not a scene, just a refusal to stop paying attention. My mom has her car, she has her job, she has her accounts. She has a new deadbolt and a copy of the key on my keychain. Roland has a hearing date. What he doesn't have is 3 more years. The choices we make when something feels wrong, whether to look closer or look away, those choices compound. They don't stay the same size. Every time I chose to stay quiet, the situation became a little harder to walk back. Every time I finally chose to act, something shifted. That's not luck or fate. That's just how cause and consequence work, quietly, underneath every story like this one. I don't think I'm particularly brave. I think I got tired of being comfortable at my mother's expense. That's a small distinction, but it's the only honest one I have.